Early one morning, Edward was returning to Wellsworth from his overnight stay at Knapford. It was the morning after the Fat Controller had told the engines about the 1923 accident, and Edward couldn't help worrying. He didn't like to see his two friends arguing, and he couldn't help feeling that he may have been a little bit responsible. After all, he could have been a bit more diplomatic when talking to that railway inspector. He halted just before the signal box and whistled twice to let the signalmen know to switch him over to the yard tracks. "Morning, Edward," called a familiar voice. Edward glanced over, spotting Thomas at the water tower and Annie and Clarabelle waiting at the platform. "Hello, Thomas," Edward replied. "What's wrong, Edward?" Thomas asked. "It's that feud between Gordon and Alfred." "Oh? What's that about, anyway?" "The Fat Controller explained it all last night. Do you remember when Gordon first came to the railway?" Thomas thought back. "There was some sort of accident, wasn't there, at Maron Station?" "Yes. Alfred accidentally bumped his train and dropped some sleepers on the track in front of Gordon. Gordon thinks he did it deliberately." Thomas scoffed. "Alfred would never do a thing like that," he replied. "And besides, those sleepers could have come off at any time." "Indeed," Edward replied. A moment later, he realized exactly what Thomas had said. "Hold on, what did you say?" "I saw some sleepers on Alfred's train move when he went through Knapford that night." Edward gasped. "Did you tell the inspectors that?" "They didn't ask me, and I didn't know it was important." "Thomas, this changes everything. You should tell Gordon as soon as you can." "I will," Thomas replied, and he quickly backed down to collect Annie and Clarabelle. Thomas's morning run usually reaches Knapford around morning tea time, and the return journey departs just before the express at noon. Today was no exception, and Thomas was already at the platform when Gordon backed down onto the waiting express coaches. The big engine looked over. "Hello, little Thomas," he said. "Hello, Gordon," Thomas replied. "I understand the Fat Controller had a word about that accident in 1923 last night?" "Yes. Why do you ask?" "Because nobody asked me what I saw that night." "Well, what did you see?" "I had just collected some coaches to prepare them for Winston's evening passenger train. I had to wait for Alfred to clear the goods line before I could take them to the station. He took the crossover a bit faster than usual, and as he went past I saw some sleepers on one of his flat cars move. I tried to whistle a warning, but I don't think he heard me." "To be honest, Gordon, I'm surprised he got as far as Maron before they fell off." Gordon was gobsmacked. "Why didn't you mention this earlier?" "Nobody asked me. I didn't know it was important." "Well, Gordon broke off. He had been given a lot to think about, and said nothing as he departed with the express. A short while after Gordon's conversation with Thomas, Alfred was heading along the main line. He had a goods train which was to be delivered to one of the electric engines at Kildane Station. He was still thinking about the accident in 1923, but unlike then, he wasn't going to let his thoughts distract him. He slowed as he took the crossover, negotiating it carefully. As he ran over the points to the branch line, he felt them move beneath him. "Driver!" he called. Alfred's driver threw on the brakes. Alfred skidded to a halt between the branch and main lines. "Are you all right?" called Sean, who had been waiting on the branch line tracks. "I think so," Alfred replied. "I'm just derailed." At that moment, Gordon was approaching Maron Station with the express. The big engine was lost in thought. "What's that up ahead?" Gordon's driver asked. "It's a red flag," Gordon replied, catching sight of the Maron station master standing at the end of the platform. Gordon stopped at the station. The station master came running up. "Alfred's off the rails at Kildane, and his trucks are blocking the up line. Can you help clear him?" "Of course," Gordon replied. After all he'd put Alfred through, helping him would be the least he could do. While the guard explained the situation to the passengers, Gordon quickly chuffed off. It had started raining by the time Gordon reached Kildane station. He slowly took the crossover and buffered up to the back of Alfred's train. His driver then coupled him up. The Kildane station master joined them a moment later. "Andy's bringing some workmen down from Abbey station. Can you help them get Alfred back on the tracks?" he asked. "Of course," Gordon replied. Gordon slowly backed away with the trucks, taking them to Maron station. By the time he'd returned, Andy had arrived and the workmen had laid temporary rails to guide Alfred back onto the tracks. Gordon slowly eased forward and was coupled up to Alfred. Slowly but surely, Gordon helped Alfred back onto the rails, moving carefully on the temporary track. Alfred said nothing as the big engine helped him back. He thought Gordon might laugh at him. "Are you okay, Alfred?" Gordon asked, as they approached Maron station. Such concern was the last thing Alfred had expected to hear from Gordon. "Gordon, did you bang your smoke box or something?" Alfred replied. "No, but I did talk to Thomas." "Thomas? What does he have to do with it?" "Do you remember hearing him whistle when you passed him at Knapford that night?" "I'm not quite sure. I was a bit distracted." "He was trying to warn you. He'd seen those sleepers shift when you took the crossover." "Oh," Alfred said, realization dawning. "It seems I owe you an apology, Alfred," Gordon said. "I'm sorry." "Thank you, Gordon," Alfred replied. Both engines fell silent. After arguing and bickering for 6 decades, they couldn't just become friends in an instant. But at least the fighting was over. The Fat Controller was waiting for the 2 engines when they arrived at Maron station. "I'm glad to see you two seem to have settled your argument," he said. He turned to Alfred. "Alfred, Edward has told me about what Thomas saw that night. I have spoken to the Chief Inspecting Officer of the Railway Inspectorate, and in the light of this new evidence, he is happy to reopen the investigation into your accident." Alfred grinned. "I'm glad to hear it." "So am I," Gordon added. He paused for a moment. "Alfred, would you like to take the express the rest of the way?" "Are you sure?" Alfred asked. "Yes, consider it an apology of sorts." "Thank you, Gordon." Gordon quickly shunted out of the way, and Alfred backed down onto the waiting express. Then, with a cheerful toot of his whistle, he chuffed off, a much happier engine.